In mid-July 2025, the Yangtze River basin once again became the stage for a drama that millions of Chinese had grown both accustomed to and fearful of: the massive release of floodwaters from the Three Gorges Dam. At dawn on July 16th, local time, 11 spillways were opened simultaneously, unleashing a staggering 44,000 cubic meters of water every second. For residents living downstream, this number was not a mere statistic. It was the difference between dry land and homes drowned beneath a brown, raging torrent. What made the event even more chilling was its rarity. Since the dam's completion in 2003, it was only the second time all 11 gates had been opened. The last occurrence, in 2020, had left indelible scars on communities stretching from Hubei to Jiangsu. When the official announcement came, it was framed as a necessary flood control measure. Engineers described it in measured tones, assuring the public that everything was under control. But for ordinary citizens, memories of previous disasters resurfaced immediately. Online, a Hubei resident bluntly remarked, "If they open all 11 spillways, it means Hubei has been abandoned." His words spread quickly, not because they were hyperbolic, but because they captured the grim reality downstream. Rain had been pounding the upper reaches of the Yangtze since July 13th. In provinces like Chongqing and Sichuan, rainfall stations recorded volumes not seen in decades. Some towns experienced over 300 millimeters of precipitation in just 3 hours, a deluge powerful enough to overwhelm storm drains, reservoirs, and natural river channels. Water levels surged in the tributaries, funneling massive inflows into the already swollen reservoir behind the Three Gorges Dam. Engineers faced a stark choice: hold the water longer and risk breaching the dam's structural limits, or discharge and sacrifice downstream communities. Predictably, the latter option was chosen. By July 14th, gauges in Wuhan's Hankou station were already sounding alarms. The river there rose to 26.8 meters, only half a meter shy of the official warning threshold. Hydrologists knew this was merely the beginning. As the inflows from upstream swelled further, Wuhan's flood defenses, many decades old and poorly maintained, were pushed toward collapse. The air was heavy with tension. Even before the announcement of the 11 gates opening, residents could sense what was coming. Shops stacked sandbags by their doors, families moved belongings to higher floors, and farmers prepared to lose their crops. But the scale of discharge was unlike anything ordinary people could have prepared for. Within hours of the gates opening, riverbanks hundreds of kilometers downstream were overtopped. In Xiaogan, roads became indistinguishable from rivers, and farmers' markets were submerged under more than a meter of water. Videos circulated on social media showing cars floating like toys in an endless muddy ocean, while residents stood helpless on rooftops, watching entire fields vanish under the flood. Local humor, as it often does in times of crisis, tried to soften the blow. In Zhongyang, residents waded through waist-deep water not with their dogs but with ducks on leashes. Delivery riders joked that their electric bikes had become submarines, still functioning despite being half submerged. Children cast fishing nets from balconies, catching carp that had escaped from aquaculture farms upstream. Yet behind the jokes lay desperation. Those fish represented the livelihood of farmers who had invested their savings in ponds now destroyed by the flood discharge. What compounded the tragedy was the lack of transparency. State media emphasized the heroic efforts of dam operators to protect the Yangtze Basin, yet avoided mentioning the losses borne by tens of thousands downstream. Independent footage told another story: mud-colored torrents pouring into entire villages, railway underpasses turned into lakes, and bridges rendered useless as water gushed over their decks. Perhaps most symbolic was the Pidu River Bridge in Suizhou. Normally a vital artery for transport, it was shown in viral clips with floodwaters surging over its surface, forcing drivers to halt in disbelief. In nearby Shundu district, a van attempting to cross a smaller bridge was swept away, killing 4 passengers, a woman in her 30s, a child en route to tutoring classes, and 2 elderly relatives. Their deaths, confirmed the following day, ignited a wave of online grief and outrage. The incident laid bare what many had long suspected. Public safety infrastructure was woefully inadequate, and lives were being sacrificed for the dam's continued operation. As engineers released their carefully worded reports and officials downplayed the severity, ordinary citizens were left to grapple with rising waters in the dead of night. Families in Jingzhou reported water entering their homes suddenly, rising knee-deep within hours. "Look at our house. It's like we're living inside a river," one resident said, showing brown water lapping at the legs of his furniture. Others, more cynical, mocked the city's engineering projects. They spent billions on drainage, and a single storm turns the whole place into Starbucks coffee. Indeed, aerial footage of the city revealed streets stained a muddy brown, as if the metropolis had been dipped in latte. By the morning of July 16th, it was clear this was not an isolated local event but a regional catastrophe. Provinces across central China, Hubei, Hunan, Henan, reported extreme rainfall and record-breaking floods. Reservoirs upstream, including Danjiankou, had also opened their gates, compounding the torrents. The official narrative insisted that these discharges were coordinated for flood prevention. Yet residents downstream found little comfort in such assurances, watching helplessly as their homes, shops, and fields disappeared beneath the rising tide. The irony was bitter. A project once hailed as the Great Wall of water management now symbolized something else entirely. For many, the Three Gorges Dam was no longer an emblem of modern China's engineering might, but a reminder of human fragility in the face of political and technological hubris. And as waters continued to rise, the question shifted from whether the dam could contain the river to whether society could survive the consequences of its operation. And any consequences, whether dam could contain the river, to whether society could survive the consequences of its operation. When the water finally spilled into the villages and cities along the Yangtze, the scenes were surreal. Life that had seemed ordinary only a week earlier was upended overnight. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed, not gradually, but with the suddenness of a switch being flipped. One moment, people were preparing dinner. The next, they were scrambling to move refrigerators, beds, and treasured family photos to upper floors, hoping the waters would not rise further. In Xiangyang, a farmer named Lu Sheng had just invested in rebuilding his pig farm after last year's heavy rains. On July 15th, he stood waist-deep in water, watching the roofs of his barns barely visible above the torrent. The animals had already drowned. "This is not a natural disaster," he shouted at a journalist. "This is a man-made flood. They opened the gates and we are paying the price." His words echoed the frustration of countless families. While officials called the discharges necessary measures, residents felt sacrificed for the sake of protecting larger cities or maximizing electricity generation. Wuhan, often seen as the barometer of central Chinese survival against the Yangtze's wrath, became a stage for human resilience and despair alike. Residents of Hanyang district stacked furniture like barricades. A shop owner placed her refrigerators horizontally against the glass storefront to slow the water's entry. But by dawn, her shop resembled an aquarium. Fish from a nearby flooded pond swam lazily between her overturned shelves. Her losses, she calculated, exceeded 3 years of earnings. Insurance, she discovered, would not cover flood damage caused by dam discharge. Elderly residents faced the harshest realities. In Chaogan, rescue workers, most of them volunteers, found an 82-year-old woman sitting on the roof of her collapsed home, clutching a single cooking pot. "I saved this," she said weakly, "because I thought we would still need to cook when the water goes down." Her children had moved to Shenzhen years earlier for factory jobs, leaving her alone. For many elderly, survival depended not on official relief but on neighbors and strangers who arrived with makeshift rafts and plastic basins to ferry them to safety. Children, too, were forced to adapt in unimaginable ways. In Jingzhou, schools had closed, but classrooms were converted into temporary shelters. A boy named Hao, barely 8, used his school desk as a flotation device when water rushed into his family's ground-floor apartment. His father later recalled, "We taught him to swim in the irrigation canal. We never imagined it would save his life at home." Some families clung to humor to withstand the devastation. Videos circulated of residents tying empty plastic bottles around their waists to float, or paddling through intersections on inflatable swimming pools meant for toddlers. In Yucheng, a group of young men brought out guitars and sang from a rooftop as the waters rose around them. "If we don't laugh, we'll cry," one of them posted online. Yet the smiles faded quickly when food shortages began. With farmlands drowned and transportation paralyzed, many markets had little more than instant noodles and bottled water to sell at double or triple the normal price. Aquaculture farmers were among the hardest hit. Vast ponds filled with carp, catfish, and shrimp, representing years of investment, were wiped out overnight. Fishermen rushed with nets to scoop up what they could, while opportunistic residents filled buckets with stray fish swimming into alleys. The irony was brutal. While some residents posted cheerful videos of free seafood, the farmers stood on the banks in tears, watching livelihoods float away. Meanwhile, the government's response was uneven at best. State television aired footage of soldiers stacking sandbags accompanied by stirring, patriotic music. But on the ground, locals reported that most rescue and relief operations came not from the military, but from volunteer groups armed with dinghies, ropes, and sheer determination. In one village near Xianing, a group of delivery workers, men who usually spent their days ferrying food orders, formed a rescue brigade, navigating submerged streets to carry trapped families to safety. Their electric scooters had been rendered useless. But in inflatable boats borrowed from nearby tourist sites, they became unlikely heroes. The floods did more than wash away homes, they stripped away illusions of stability. For years, the Three Gorges Dam had been held up as the ultimate safeguard against the Yangtze's unpredictable fury. Officials boasted that it would protect against a once-in-a-century flood, but as families in Hubei waded through chest-high water, they asked bitterly, if this was protection, what did disaster look like? The sense of abandonment deepened when officials insisted that some apparent breaches were merely overflows. In Hangkou Village, residents filmed torrents bursting through earthen embankments, dragging away trees and livestock. Overflow? One farmer shouted in disbelief. Does overflow look like this? His video was swiftly deleted from social media platforms, but not before being shared tens of thousands of times. The psychological toll was immense. In shelters, parents whispered about debts they could never repay. Children cried for pets left behind, and young workers worried that their factories, already struggling in China's slowing economy, would never reopen after being submerged. In a half-flooded internet cafe in Wuhan, a college student typed on a salvaged computer, "We study hard, we work hard, but every summer the river takes everything. What future is left for us?" His post, too, was censored within hours. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these submerged lives was the resilience people displayed despite their losses. In Shenyang, volunteers cooked communal meals on raised platforms above floodwaters, using salvaged firewood and bottled gas. In Yueyang, carpenters used debris from collapsed houses to build makeshift bridges so residents could cross from one rooftop to another. These acts of solidarity gave people the strength to endure, but they also underscored how little institutional support was available when catastrophe struck. As night fell on July 16th, many villages along the Yangtze glowed not with streetlights. They were long extinguished by the floods, but with the faint light of candles and battery-powered lamps. Families huddled together in upper floors or attics, listening to the sound of rushing water beneath them, wondering if dawn would bring relief or more devastation. The phrase most often repeated by survivors was not anger, nor even despair, but a haunting question. How long must we endure this? The floods of July were not simply a natural disaster. They exposed structural weaknesses in China's infrastructure and governance, raising troubling questions about the promises once made when the Three Gorges Dam was built. When construction began in the 1990s, the project was hailed as a marvel of engineering. Officials promised it would tame the Yangtze, generate clean energy, and secure the lives of millions living downstream. Billions of dollars were invested, 1.3 million people were displaced, and entire towns were submerged to make way for the reservoir. State media trumpeted that it would end the cycle of flood disasters once and for all. Yet reality has been far less reassuring. The July deluge highlighted what critics had warned for decades. No dam, however massive, can fully control nature. On July 16th, when 11 spillways opened to release 44,000 cubic meters of water per second, the operation was presented as routine flood management. But for residents downstream, it was a betrayal. Instead of protection, the dam became a trigger, sending walls of water into provinces already reeling from torrential rains. Reports from Wuhan, Jingzhou, and Yichang showed that local embankments and dikes were poorly maintained. In some cases, officials had siphoned off funds meant for flood defense, leaving earthen levees thin and brittle. Videos circulated of dikes collapsing under pressure, exposing steel rods rusted through, or sandbags filled with nothing but loose soil. One local engineer admitted anonymously, "The money disappears long before it reaches the riverbanks. What remains cannot hold against even a minor flood, let alone the discharge from the Three Gorges." The overflow versus breach debate became symbolic of how authorities communicated with the public. In Hengpa District, Wuhan, officials insisted that a flooded village had not suffered a dike breach, but merely an overflow event. Residents, watching torrents tear through their fields and homes, were enraged. "They are playing with words," said a farmer. "Whether you call it overflow or breach, our houses are gone." The semantic game underscored a deeper truth. Rather than accountability, the system prioritized saving face. Beyond the Yangtze, other reservoirs joined the flood discharge, compounding the devastation. The Danjiankou Reservoir, a central component of the south-to-north water diversion project, also opened its gates. Its operation, critics argue, prioritizes Beijing's water security over the lives of those downstream. Scholar Yang Chan of Dano University documented how raising the reservoir's height in 2013 flooded over 370 square kilometers of farmland, displaced thousands more, and altered local climate patterns. Villagers in Hubei bitterly joked, "Beijing drinks clean water, we drown in dirty water." The consequences of such mega-projects extend beyond flooding. Researchers have tracked alarming erosion along the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze since the Three Gorges began operation in 2003. With sediment trapped upstream, riverbeds downstream have deepened by as much as 20 meters in some sections. This has destabilized riverbanks, leading to frequent collapses. In 2017, an embankment failure in Jiangsu province swallowed 9 homes and acres of farmland. These collapses are no longer isolated incidents, they have become routine. Each collapse brings not only material loss but also terror to residents living near the water. Critics argue that this pattern reflects a broader flaw in China's development model, prioritizing speed and spectacle over sustainability and safety. The Three Gorges Dam and south-to-north diversion were promoted as symbols of national strength, yet their benefits to ordinary people remain questionable. Energy production brings profit and water diversion secures political stability in Beijing, but the rural poor pay the price we were told to sacrifice for the nation, said a displaced villager from Hunan. But the nation never remembers us when the floods return. The July disaster also revealed failures in emergency management. In Tiangyan, residents reported that no evacuation warnings were given before the spillways were opened. Families woke up to find water pouring into their homes in the middle of the night. In Suzhou, a van carrying 4 people, including a child, was swept off a bridge when water surged unexpectedly. All 4 perished. Their deaths sparked outrage online, with netizens asking why roadblocks had not been placed and why local governments were unprepared despite days of rainfall warnings. Censorship compounded the anger. Videos of submerged villages, collapsed bridges, and crying families were swiftly removed from social platforms. State outlets highlighted heroic rescues and military involvement, but rarely mentioned the failures that led to those rescues being necessary in the first place. "We are drowning in silence as well as water," one Wuhan resident remarked bitterly. Even infrastructure built to withstand floods proved fragile. In Chongqing, heavy rains on July 13th raised water levels by 5 meters in a single day. Roads collapsed, railway underpasses became impromptu lakes, and bridges were forced to close. Critics pointed out that such failures were not simply the fault of extreme weather, but of shoddy construction, what Chinese citizens derisively call tofu-dreg projects. Corners are cut, materials are cheapened, and safety checks are rushed, all under pressure to meet deadlines or secure contracts. The paradox is painful. China has invested more than $100 billion, 0 cents, in flood control projects, yet ordinary citizens feel less safe than ever. Each summer brings not relief but dread. In 2025, as families in Hubei and Hunan swept mud from their homes, many asked the same question. If the system is designed to protect, why does it fail so predictably? Perhaps the most damning cracks in the system are not physical but political. By prioritizing energy output, water diversion, and urban safety in elite cities, the government has left countless rural and peri-urban communities exposed. When floods hit, it is they who bear the brunt. "The dam was supposed to save us," said a shopkeeper in Shenyang, "but instead it saved itself. We were never part of the plan." Behind every statistic in the July floods lies a human story of families uprooted, livelihoods destroyed, and lives cut short. While officials speak in terms of cubic meters per second or millimeters of rainfall, residents of Hubei, Hunan, and beyond experience the disaster in far more personal ways. In Shaogan, a grandmother sat on the roof of her house with her 2 grandchildren for almost 12 hours, waiting for rescue boats. The children asked repeatedly when they could go home, not understanding that their home, half submerged and crumbling, might never be livable again. "They promised us protection when they built the dam," she said softly to a volunteer who finally arrived. "But now I am protecting my grandchildren with nothing but hope." The story of the van in Suzhou became a rallying point for grief. A mother in her 30s, her elderly father, and her young child all drowned together when their vehicle was swept from a bridge. For days, their relatives searched along the riverbank until the bodies were found. When the funeral was held, villagers gathered not only to mourn, but also to vent their anger. Why was the bridge still open? Why was there no warning? And why must ordinary families always pay with their lives? Such tragedies are multiplied across the flood zone. In Xiangyang, entire villages disappeared underwater. Farmers lost crops they had nurtured for months. Fish farmers watched helplessly as their ponds overflowed and stock escaped into the torrent. For outsiders, the scenes of villagers laughing as they caught stray fish seemed almost comical. But for the aquaculture families who had invested everything in those ponds, it was ruin. "Every fish they catch is one less meal for my children this winter," one farmer lamented. Urban life also collapsed. In Wuhan, delivery drivers waded waist-deep through muddy streets, trying to fulfill orders because staying home meant no income. Some wore improvised plastic bags on their legs. Others risked electric bikes short-circuiting in brown floodwater. "If I don't deliver, I don't eat," said one rider. The desperation illustrated how fragile livelihoods are in China's gig economy, where millions survive on day-to-day earnings with no safety net. When you decouple, the floods tore apart not only homes but also the illusion of security. Middle-class families who had taken out mortgages found their apartments uninhabitable, yet still owed monthly payments. Small businesses, already weakened by economic slowdown, were dealt fatal blows as shops flooded, inventories spoiled, and customers vanished. A supermarket owner in Zhanjiang opened her store on July 16th, only to find toppled shelves, ruined stock, and losses she could not recover from. "I worked 20 years for this," she sobbed, "and in one night it was gone." Children were not spared. Schools in Hunan and Hubei were submerged, forcing classes to halt indefinitely. Parents worried about both education and safety, with some students stranded in boarding schools cut off by rising waters. Videos showed young boys wading chest-high through murky streets, clutching school bags over their heads to keep homework dry. Social media users mourned what one called a generation growing up in mud instead of classrooms. The elderly, too, bore the brunt. In many rural villages, young adults had migrated to cities, leaving older parents behind. When floods came, they had no one to lift furniture to higher ground, no one to paddle makeshift rafts, no one to send SOS messages online. Volunteers reported heartbreaking scenes of old couples clinging to each other on rooftops, refusing to evacuate because they had nowhere else to go. Psychological scars are harder to measure. After the waters receded, entire neighborhoods smelled of mildew and decay. Residents swept mud from their floors, salvaging what little remained. But the silence was heavier than the labor. "We don't talk about rebuilding anymore," said one young man in Qingzhou. "We only talk about surviving the next flood." On social media, phrases like "lying flat in the water" began to circulate, a dark parody of the Tangping movement that had symbolized youth resistance to overwork. Now it symbolized resignation to climate disasters and governmental neglect. Grief, too, was censored. Families who tried to speak publicly about lost relatives found their posts deleted. In Wuhan, a father who lost his daughter in the van accident wrote an online tribute describing her laughter and dreams of becoming a teacher. Within hours, the post vanished. "They erased her twice," he told a friend, "first from life, then from memory." The silence created a cruel paradox. While state television broadcast images of soldiers carrying children on their shoulders and officials inspecting embankments, countless victims were left voiceless. Heroic rescues made for powerful propaganda, but the failures that made those rescues necessary were buried. It was as if suffering itself had become subversive. Communities, however, found ways to mourn together. In Xianing, villagers held candlelight vigils for those swept away by sudden surges. In Chongqing, where roads collapsed after record rains, residents built shrines of flowers and photos at the edge of broken highways. "We cannot trust the state to remember us," said one participant, "so we will remember each other." The floods also deepened inequality. In elite neighborhoods of Wuhan, flood pumps kept streets dry while poorer districts drowned. Wealthy families evacuated to hotels in higher ground, while migrant workers slept in damp warehouses or under highway overpasses. "The water does not discriminate," a social worker observed, "but survival does. Money buys boats, pumps, and dry floors. Poverty buys only fear." The human cost extended beyond China's borders. International observers noted the potential global impact: disrupted supply chains, damaged factories in Hubei, and agricultural losses that could raise food prices worldwide. But inside China, the focus remained on personal survival. For families who had lost everything, global economics meant little. Their world had shrunk to one question: how to make it through tomorrow. The July floods left behind not just water stains on walls, but also fractures in trust. People no longer believed that the grand projects, Three Gorges, South to North diversion, or any other, were designed with them in mind. "They say it is for the people," a teacher in Hunan remarked, "but the people are always the ones who drown." The story of the July floods and the role of the Three Gorges Dam has sparked heated debates both inside and outside China. Some see it as a symbol of engineering ambition, while others call it a man-made disaster waiting to happen. But beyond the statistics and official narratives, what truly matters are the voices of ordinary people, those who live by the rivers, those who lose their homes, and those who carry the burden of these floods year after year. So now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe the Three Gorges Dam has fulfilled its promise of protecting people and providing stability, or has it become a ticking time bomb that creates more suffering than safety? Should megaprojects like this still be pursued in the name of progress, or should China shift towards smaller, community-centered solutions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is important, not just as viewers, but as part of a global conversation about how humanity balances nature, technology, and survival.